Naftuli Moster, Executive Director.
Good evening, committee members, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to offer testimony tonight. I'm the founder and executive director of Yaffed, Young Advocates for Fair Education, an organization that's working to improve secular education in ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic Yeshivas. I'm about to share with you the most stunning piece of data you've heard all day. The percentage of Hasidic male adolescents in New York graduating with a high school diploma is almost zero. In fact, approximately 90% of Hasidic boys ages 13 and up received no secular education at all. And that includes basic English, reading and writing and arithmetic, let alone any science or social studies. Until the age 13, Hasidic boys are lucky if they receive a measly 90 minutes of secular instruction. And even then, it only includes basic English and arithmetic. This is in blatant violation of New York State law requiring non-public schools to provide an education that is at least substantially equivalent to that of public schools. Most graduates of these yeshivas aren't prepared even for minimum wage jobs, nor are they prepared to pursue higher education. In fact, most Hasidic yeshiva graduates have never heard the word semester, credit, or GPA. The majority of Hasidic families are forced to rely on government assistance. New Square and Kiryas Joel, two entirely Hasidic villages, are the poorest in the entire country. I have to respond to some of the testimony by the representative from Agudath Israel. No one has argued that all schools who have the word yeshiva in them deprive their students of an education. And Rabbi Silver's use of high-performing modern Orthodox schools to cover for the mostly Hasidic boys' schools where the severe form of educational neglect is taking place is unacceptable, and for once he needs to be called out for it, and I thank some of you who have. To the contrary, we point to those schools, to those yeshivas that manage to provide both a solid religious education and a secular education as proof that you can achieve both. You don't need to teach Judaic studies at the expense of or the exclusion of secular studies. In its revised guidelines, the state is requiring yeshivas to teach 3.5 hours of secular studies and allows them to teach as much religious studies as they want beyond that. Yet Agudath Israel has openly stated that this is too much to ask of them. We believe the state did not go far enough, and that there are several loopholes left that would allow the bad apples to continue getting away with denying children an education. For instance, the length of time NYS has given for schools to come into compliance is far too long. It also doesn't empower local districts to do unannounced inspections, which we think is absolutely necessary because many yeshiva graduates have said that the yeshivas cheat when they are given advance notice of an upcoming inspection. We implore the state legislature to empower the state education department and local districts to once and for all address this educational neglect. As Senator Kruger correctly stated, the fact that substantial equivalency hasn't been enforced for many decades is no excuse to continue doing so. It only adds to the urgency of fixing this problem once and for all. Thank you all.
Senator Shelley Mayer.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for our own meeting about the real experience of a education that had absolutely no secular component and left so many students, particularly males, in those particular yeshivas with zero education and zero possibility for jobs. I think it's important as we look forward, you are looking for legislative solutions to, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, to authorize the commissioner to really empower her to act on her policy recommendations. Am I right about that?
Well, we think the Felder Amendment is unconstitutional, and by the way, Agudath Israel took credit for putting Senator Simcha Felder up to it, which sought to undermine the forthcoming guidelines, which have since come out. We think that should be repealed. It's unconstitutional, and it presents certain obstacles to NYS in terms of the interpretation. Now NYS has to take into consideration religious studies as part of their overall evaluation, and it also adds an extra layer of the review that they need to do specifically for yeshivas, as even the Catholic school representative acknowledged they're not given that opportunity. So we do think that that would be step number one, but step number two would be to, as you said, strengthen the law even from the way it used to be, because it was relatively vague. It just said it has to be substantial equivalent to non-public schools. That being said, the previous law, or the way it was before the Felder Amendment, coupled with the new NYS guidelines, are very strong, and we could definitely live with that. But it always helps to continue empowering the state. As I mentioned, there are a few problems with the new guidelines that, in our opinion, don't go far enough. For instance, the timeline, the fact that some districts can take up to 3 years even to inspect all the schools for the first time, and from then they only inspect them once every 5 years. The inspections are announced. We know for a fact that yeshivas put up a show, some yeshivas put up a show on the days that the inspectors come. So there are some loopholes, but at the very least, we do hope the legislature would empower the State Education Department and the Commissioner, the Board of Regents, to keep going in this direction of enforcing substantial equivalency.
Would you oppose the commissioner and SED having the direct power to go into the schools as opposed to the local school board?
If they are funded to do so, then it may not be a problem. Off the top of my head, at the moment, they absolutely do not have the capacity to oversee all 1,800 non-public schools.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblywoman Jaffe.
Naftuli, thank you for joining us today and sharing your the information. Wanted also to have a sense, if you reach, and I've asked this question before, of if you reaching out to other youth and young adults in the community and getting a response in terms of seeing if there could be a revision in terms of the way the schools are functioning. And the second is that you've had a conversation with the commissioner, and how did that evolve?
As far as youth in the community, many yeshiva graduates, as well as parents of current children, very interested in seeing the yeshiva education improving. The fact that we're not hearing their voices is only because, unlike what Rabbi Silber said, there is no choice really. In those communities, people are born and raised in communities and sects of communities where this is all they know, and a lot depends on complying, on towing the line. That includes jobs. It includes, and in some cases, there's been violence against people who've chosen to deviate. As you may know, I've been threatened violence plenty because of the work I do. So it's not an easy thing to speak up, but privately they do. As Senator Mayer knows, I brought one a parent to her to hear directly. Those are not the people who can come up here in Albany, because in this community you got to do it through your representatives. As far as speaking with the commissioner, I've met with Christina Coughlin from SORAS, the State Office for Religious and Independent Schools. I'm impressed with their determination to be serious about these guidelines, but even they acknowledge certain limitations in terms of their capacity to see it through, and they themselves realize that once they determine that a school is not compliant with the state standards, they may have to give them too much time to come into compliance. That could take more than a year. That's a problem, because all throughout this time they continue getting government funding without even essentially being a school. If they're not providing even 90 minutes of secular education, can you even call that a school? So I find that problematic, but the state said that there are going to be benchmarks throughout this timeline. So if they don't meet the initial benchmarks, then already they could be determined non-compliant. So that's a step in the right direction, if you will.
Thank you. Oh, Senator Robert Jackson.
Naftuli, let me thank you for advocating like you've been. I've seen you and heard you in New York City.
Thank you.
And considering the fact that the city of New York had 3 years and didn't do much at all, and if I wasn't in here, I would say something else to really express myself as to they did nothing, in my opinion. But you're keeping at it, and you have a lot of support out there within the Orthodox Jewish community that may not speak out, but also from legislators also. I, support the fact that if, in fact, yeshivas that are not following the law and rules and regulations, then they should not take the funds if they're not going to live up to it. And if, in fact, the Department of Education at New York City and or state find out that they're falsifying documentation, the funding should be stopped immediately, in my opinion, because they're lying and cheating. And that doesn't matter whether it's an Orthodox community or Catholic school or any other school. If they're falsifying documentation and not telling the truth, then there needs to be consequences.
Agreed. That's actually another loophole. We're concerned that, let's say, if the state determines that a school has been non-compliant and essentially begins cutting funding and instructs them to transfer their students elsewhere, we're concerned that the school is going to shut down and reopen in the same building, same staff, same people, and we would like for the commissioner to make it clear that no, if you've been involved in a school that hasn't been compliant despite several attempts, that people who are involved in running the school can't just open up another school under a different name.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi. Thank you again. Sorry the hour's so late. So you referenced that this is not a problem for all yeshivas, but you also referenced the Agudath Israel testimony, and I was shocked by a statistic when I read their testimony, so I just want to offer it to you to help me understand. They say that based on data of passing of Regents exams, that Jewish schools outperformed across every category of Jewish schools tested. Quote, in ultra-Orthodox schools, 80% passed the Regents. In Hasidic schools, 80.7% passed the Regents. That
Yeah.
doesn't seem to jive with your
Yeah, no,
data.
they did some magic to get this number out of a bag. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. In fact, in nearly all Hasidic boys' schools, there are no Regents. They don't exist. They don't even learn English. They don't learn math. They literally spend 12 to 14 hours a day studying Judaic studies. That is the Torah, the Talmud, Halacha, and all of it is in Yiddish. On average, most Hasidic men leaving yeshiva, we can't say graduating, but coming out of yeshiva literally cannot communicate effectively in the English language. So when you narrow, from a sample of 5 specific Hasidic schools, mostly girls' schools, from there you could say, oh yeah, they're performing better. And it should be noted that within this the Hasidic system, the girls tend to get a better education because they can't grow up to be rabbis, right? The boys, on the other hand, that's all they're being groomed to do. So this is why the girls do get a better education. In fact, they're not even allowed to study Talmud in Orthodox Judaism, which is what boys spend literally the entire day. I should mention, Agudath Israel isn't denying this. They're not saying that their Hasidic boys' high schools teach any secular studies. Ask them, point blank. They haven't said any differently. The latest thing they're trying to do is to spin that Judaic studies contain secular studies. It doesn't. So, whichever way you put it, there's no secular studies content in the Judaic studies. So,
Right.
but I honestly don't know where they've gotten those grades from.
Well, my colleagues just suggested I wasn't reading the sentences right, and that perhaps it was of only those schools that did Regents.
Oh, there you go.
So if you're describing that the vast majority don't take Regents exams, therefore
Yes.
they wouldn't be in an analysis of Regents findings.
Right. Yes. Correct. And there's another issue, shortcoming of the law. It doesn't require non-public schools to offer the Regents. It doesn't require annual testing. They get funding, so some of them administer it. Even when it comes to teachers, it only requires competent teachers, not certified teachers. So oftentimes yeshiva graduates who themselves didn't get a proper education then teach the next generation of yeshiva students. And there's a big joke that oftentimes they have to ask their wives what a word means or how to say certain things or a math equation because the next day they have to teach it to their students.
My time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here to the bitter end with us. So,
My pleasure.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes the education hearing. It's 9:15. At 9, just over 12 hours from now, at 9:30 in the morning, we will be having the mental health hearing. Perhaps an appropriate end to this week.
Wait a second.